Well, welcome, John Anderson, legendary coder. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. I got a degree in electrical engineering, and but at the time when I graduated from college, my biggest interest was water skiing.
Right.
So rather than taking a job that would have been like the best job for electrical engineer, I just decided to move to Central Florida and take a job with a telephone company. And it was in the engineering department, but it was just pushing paper. And while I was there, I started playing video games in the
Mhm.
mall and the arcade. And there was a bar across the street from where I worked. And I'd go over there at lunchtime and I'd play video games in it. And I got just so hooked on Space Invaders at the time. I wanted to play it at home. And I went and bought a Bally game machine, and it would overheat and lock up all the time. And my buddy had bought an Apple computer. So I took my game machine back out of my Bally back and returned it and went and got an Apple computer. And I started teaching myself to program. First thing I did was started working with BASIC,
Mhm.
and I bought Bill Budge's 3D construction set, and I just made like a little space game where you kind of use the keyboard to push yourself around in outer space and just visit little things that look like stars and stuff floating around out there. And it was like, one frame every 2 seconds or something, one frame a second. And I was like, oh, well, that's because I wrote it in visual or in basic, not visual basic, obviously. Uh, so I thought I'll learn assembly language and just rewrite these control routines in assembly language and it'll go faster. So I did that, and it went the same speed. So it was obviously all the 3D calculations and everything. But at that point, I'd gotten more interested in programming, and I'd learned assembly language a little bit and started just studying uh, all the things in the Apple, the hardware and how it worked and so forth. And I saw these, guys in the magazines where they were just, had a lot of popularity with their games they were producing. And I looked at the games and I thought I could probably write something like that. So I started writing what was supposed to be Defender on
Right.
the app, and I sent out a prototype of it to what back then it was Sierra Software before it was Sierra Online, and they said, "Oh yeah, come out to California. We've got this place. We'll put you up with other programmers, and you can work for us." But I just bought a house in Central Florida, and I didn't want to do that. So I was showing my game to a guy at the computer store, and he said, "Oh, the guy that owns this computer store, Scott Adams, is a publisher." And it turned out that his publishing, his facility was just like, less than a mile from my house, really close by. And I ended up working out a deal with him for a base salary and royalties. And I went to work for Adventure International. And then they closed down that facility and built another one, a dome, like
Mhm.
about 3 blocks from my house. It was really convenient. And so basically, my first game, which was supposed to be Defender, um, got Scott was afraid of getting sued at that time. There was problems with that, and he said, "Just can we do something with this and make it not Defender?" And I think we both kind of regret that a little bit, because I, ended up making two different games out of it, Eliminator and Rear Guard, and neither one of them were as good as Defender would have been. So, but just kept moving on and put that behind me, and eventually I developed, 3 games, SeaDragon, and actually for the Apple, SeaDragon was the best game,
Yeah.
and in my opinion, for sure. Um, it was based off of another game, SeaDragon, on the TRS-80, and these guys, Wayne Westmoreland and Terry Gillum, I think or their names. They're the ones that came up with it originally.
Hmm.
And Scott liked to have titles across all the computers, so I basically, when I write a game that is based on something else somebody does, it's completely original. In terms of the coding and the graphics, it's not like where you reuse code nowadays. It was all
Yeah.
original, and I took a lot of liberties and made it a little different. But basically the obstacles that you faced were the same, and the general concept was the same. When you got to the end, I added the SeaDragon with this moving wall of bricks that you had to shoot out to free them, and that was sort of the conclusion of the level. But there weren't really levels; it would just repeat again.
Yeah.
And
Just going back to Eliminator, if that's okay. Obviously, back then the machines were quite basic, let's say, weren't they, in terms of architecture? What would you say was the hardest part of programming on the Apple II?
what did you say? The hardest thing?
Yeah,
Or,
it's limited hardware, wasn't it?
well, when I look back at those times, I wonder how I even did the stuff, like how did I do the graphics? It was just, you wrote things on paper and you looked at the pixels and you reinterpreted those as binary numbers.
Mm.
And basically you stored it, and it was very basic and crude, and in that way it was also simple, even though you think, oh well, writing in machine language, that's difficult, you have to do everything yourself and everything, but it's also not complicated. Intellectually it's kind of very simple because everything's right in front of you spelled out. It's not like Einstein's theory of relativity or anything.
Yeah. So did you actually design the graphics on graph paper then and just write out the binaries and enter them manually?
Yes, right. That's basically how I did everything. Was just very manual. You just write down, you just draw something, colored pencils,
Mm.
and then you basically say that's a pixel and this is what the color is and so forth. And the Apple had kind of a weird pixel thing anyway, where it wasn't like in more modern computers. I won't say modern because you had the Atari and everything. The pixels were, you know, not specific colors. There was limitations on what color you could put in what position and so forth. And it's been a long time, and I don't remember the details. I'm sure that there's a lot of Apple enthusiasts that remember things a lot better than I would at this point in time.
Well, rearguard, if you just go on to rearguard, if that's okay. So that was a bit of a jump up from Eliminator in terms
Right.
of just the number of things on the screen. Was it quite difficult getting so much going on the screen and keeping the speed going?
Yeah, Eliminate. Well, of course, Rear Guard and Eliminator, like I say, they were supposed to be the same game, Defender. So you had I
Mm.
took basically the ground and the depiction of the surface of the planet or whatever,
Mm.
and put that in Rear Guard, and then I had that little guy that runs across and tries to pick up the pods and throw them in the volcano. Uh, and then you had the volcano with the lava that was spitting out of it and stuff like that. And I, I can't remember the original Rear Guard game. I think was made by Sparky Starks, and I, I think it was on the TRS-80, if I remember right. Um, and so I don't remember that game very well. I just remember I tried to basically make the game similar, and so that we could put it into the
Mm.
lineup with the same title number, and they could, like I said, Scott liked to have the games across the platform. But yeah, Rearguard had more stuff going on in it, and I thought you had asked me about the sounds,
Oh,
and the funny thing about sounds on the Apple is that I had to bury sound code throughout all of the code. In other words, you can't just stop and make a sound. So
mm.
I had to like bury things that toggle the speaker throughout all of the code, like the graphics and everything.
Yeah.
And it was just a very ad hoc sort of make up and see what happens kind of thing. So, most computers, if you have a sound card, you program the sound card to make sounds. But on the Apple, if your sound was just one bit, you just toggle, a speaker, one way or the other. And in order to make sounds without causing any disruption in the actual flow of the graphics and so forth, you just had to stick toggles to the speaker in various parts of the programs with flags that say whether you should do it now or not and things like that. It is, when I look back on it, I think it's crazy, the computers were so crude that you had to do crazy things.
Yeah.
I even later on I went to develop a tank gunnery simulator for the military. And the funny thing about that was I wrote the whole simulation in the vertical blank interrupt of the graphics card. And if people talk about interrupts, they go, "Oh, that's something you go into an interrupt and you do something very quickly and then you get back out."
Yeah.
But that's this was not a multitasking computer, an operating system. And so the easiest way to handle something real time that's synchronized with the graphics on the screen was to throw it all in the vertical blank interrupt, which it's probably a technique that you'll never hear of anybody using. And again,
SeaDragon! SeaDragon! SeaDragon!
Well, continuing with the sound question, so if we go on to SeaDragon again, if that's okay, was that the first ever game to use speech sampling, do you think?
you mean you're talking about the speech that's in SeaDragon? Yes. Yeah, a buddy of mine, Paul Schaefer, he likes to talk in a radio announcer voice. So he was the natural selection to be the voice of SeaDragon. And basically, yeah, it's one bit sampled. And, I was surprised, when I set out to do it, of course, everybody thinks, well, how many bits are you sampling audio? Because that determines the quality. But in this particular case, the cassette port was just a digital 1-bit interface. So I recorded the audio through the cassette port and was surprised to hear that it was legible. And it actually worked pretty good because, kind of like the intercom on a submarine is not going to have great quality. So it was the perfect matchup kind of thing.
Did you have to write your own sampler on the Apple to get the sound?
Yeah. I had to do everything, every little single thing that needed to be done. There was no tools of any kind back then that I knew of that I could use. I bought my Apple in May of 1980, and I quit my job at the telephone company in November of 1981. So that tells you basically the timeline from me buying the Apple, learning assembly language, starting writing my own game, and having a prototype to show people. It was about a year and a half.
So the landscape on SeaDragon, was that auto-generated? That's right.
No, it's fixed. It's a fixed land. It's a fixed tunnel that you're going through. There's nothing auto-generated there.
At the end of the level, it was quite similar to the game Phoenix. Was that an inspiration?
No, the SeaDragon was not really inspired by anything other than the name. At the time. The guys that wrote the TRS-80, the original version, I think SeaDragon was the name of the submarine. But I just kind of said, oh, well, it's SeaDragon, so let's have a SeaDragon. And that's basically, that was the only inspiration for it, was the name of the game. And what it looked like, if it looks like somebody else's SeaDragon or Dragon or something, that would have been a coincidence. I don't even remember how I drew the thing at the time. It's been so long.
Well, if we can go on to Rally Speedway, probably one of your best known titles.
Yeah.
So how did you come up with that idea?
Oh, in television.
Yeah.
The auto racing on television. A buddy of mine, we used to spend all night playing that game, all night long. And so when I switched from the Apple to the Atari, that was the game that had my attention, that I was infatuated with. And I said, I'm going to make this game on the Atari. And it came out really well. I was really happy with it. Everything, you can make your own tracks, has an editor. The sounds were good. I mean, I loved the Atari. That was really my favorite computer. And I liked it better than the Commodore 64, even though, people were saying the Commodore 64 is better for sounds and music. The Atari was a superior platform, in my opinion, for coding on. And that was a game that I really liked a lot. I enjoyed it. It's a 2-player game. The 1-player aspect, people think, well, I could play it 1 player, but that's just really for training, because the fun in the game is 2-player. And of course that, me playing with another guy playing Intellivision auto racing, I mean, I never thought of it as would be a 1-player game, but you had the 1-player mode for practice.
Was it quite difficult getting the scrolling in the game to be quite fast?
No, because the graphics in the game is all character based. It's not pixel based. And the Atari had the ability to move things on the screen just by changing a register. So you could shift the screen. You could shift the screen with a register, and then I'm trying to remember I think the whole map was in memory all at once, and all you did was scroll around with hardware, to see it. And like I said, this is 40 some odd years ago, so I could be mistaken about a few things, but if I recall correctly, I just drew the whole thing, the whole map in memory. It's all character graphics, so it doesn't take up near as much space. And then you use hardware to move it around. And then the sprites were also overlaid on top of it. Unlike the Apple, where everything has to be drawn in, you could have a pixel sprite on top of a character background. So as far as computing power was required to do all this motion was almost nothing, very, very small amount.
Was it quite difficult to code the physics of the different road surfaces? Because you could choose the different, a slippy surface, couldn't you? Icy, that sort of thing. Was it quite difficult to do that?
Well, basically, I came up with this little friction algorithm that had to do with the angle of the car versus the angle of direction of motion. And all I did was just basically change that kind of friction coefficient. In other words, if the car was like going horizontal left to right, and then you turned it, it would be still moving horizontal left to right, even though the car's pointing maybe in a different direction. And so the difference between the way it was pointed and the direction it was going would be used to modify the direction that it was going, and then at the same time, it would introduce a braking component being turned, and so that would kind of slow you down. And also I would use that angle difference to make the screeching noise of the tires and so forth. Right. And so it was actually a very simple algorithm. It wasn't all that difficult to do. And it worked out pretty good, I thought, in the end.
Yeah, one thing that struck me as well was, so obviously when you've got a 2-player game, and if it's a 1-player game, the scrolling centers on one car. And when you've got 2 vehicles and one sort of lagging behind the other one, it's slower. How did you resolve that issue? Obviously, I played the game, but
Right. Well, I can't say I invented it because it all came from Intellivision auto racing. So basically, when you have 2 cars on the screen, you just sort of split the difference on the scrolling. So the trailing car goes to the back of the screen, the car in the lead goes to the front of the screen. And when the car in the lead gets so far ahead, it stops and gives the leader points and then resets you back on the track. But it's sort of self-limiting in the sense that if you're the fastest car and you're at the front of the screen, you've got to react faster to any turns and things coming up.
Good point.
So
Yeah.
if you can get to the point where you get ahead far enough, then you can get the points and it resets. Otherwise, you're kind of risking crashing your car, because you don't know what's coming up necessarily. Although, you learn the tracks, obviously, and you can predict all that. And that's what makes you the superior racer. But one of the funny things I noticed that when playing the game way back then was if you're the lead car and you're getting way ahead, and you want to slow down a little bit, if you put on your brakes and stop quickly, the other guy will zoom past you so fast that he'll end up, crashing his car. So it's kind of a little trick to you get far ahead and then stop real quick. When you know what's going on, you have to know where the track's going, because if he gets ahead, he could win. But if you know that a turn's coming up or something like that, you can trick the guy falling behind by, stopping real quick, and he'll go zooming off into the woods and crash.
Well, I love the graphics, especially the crash animation, with the little guy that comes out of the car. That was great. Did you draw that as well? Did you animate that yourself?
Yeah, that was not in the Intellivision version. I always like to throw a little graphics things in there to spice it up. That's, everybody loves that. So so if the guy crashes and he's not going too fast, then he just runs out in waves. And if he's going really fast, then he runs out on fire and rolls over on the ground, puts the fire out, and then waves. Kind of a eye candy thing.
Sorry, for Rally Speedway, is there anything you would have changed, do you think?
Well, we did talk about before that I had to get it all onto a 16K cartridge. And in order to get all the graphics on there and everything, I used something called Huffman compression. And as I had talked to you before, I had got that from another game programmer. That was the guy Sparky Starks I mentioned earlier. I think he was the writer of Rear Guard, and I happened to he happened to live in my original hometown, and I was down there visiting, and I went and visited him, and we were just sitting around drinking a beer and stuff, and he explained this Huffman compression to me, and where you take a data set and you analyze the most common things in it and try to represent it with fewer bits and so forth. And the way he explained it, it's like I just went back and implemented it, and it worked great and all that. And then years later, probably after the internet came around, I went and searched on it and looked it up, and saw the explanation of Huffman compression by, probably, some scholar or something. And I was like, this is confusing as heck. I could have never just gone from this explanation to implementing in the game as easily as I did, just to have somebody just give you this really intuitive explanation that doesn't have any, of the more complicated ideas behind it. So that was kind of a cool thing that I was able to get all the graphics onto a cartridge, because that was my only cartridge game. All the rest of them were disc based.
Well, eventually you stopped games coding, didn't you? So did you just want to change direction career wise?
Well, are you asking me where I went after I was programming?
Yeah. So why did you leave Adventure International?
Yeah, that's a really easy one. Around the 1984 period, computer games just crashed.
Right.
The sales went down. Nobody, it was just not a good environment anymore for developing computer games. And then I guess later on, the Nintendo and those guys came out and so forth. So at that time, Scott and I we kind of mutually agreed to split ways. And I was working at home. One of the programmers, Russ Wetmore, the guy that wrote Preppy, he had come up with something called, I think it was Home Pack or something like that. Again, a long time ago. And he needed a version for the IBM PC Junior. So he contracted me to port the code over. It was actually written, I think, in a language called Action. And at the time, I think I had gotten a compiler called Desmond C, and that was on the PC. And he contracted me, and I port this. It was a home productivity software, with a text editor and a database and things like that. And that was a job I did. And then I was writing some tools for the IBM PC that I thought maybe I would try to publish. But then I got an opportunity to go to work for a simulator company. And so I decided to do that instead. They hired me because I had, 5 published video games, some of them across multiple computers, but same game. But they wanted to do this tank gunnery simulator, which was just a tabletop video game for tank gunnery. And they were a maintenance trainer company. They had no experience in visuals at all. And they hired me and put me right on the proposal. And it might sound a little audacious and bragging, but I saved the government $5 million in that particular. Well, what happened was they awarded the contract to GE for $20 million, and our price was $15 million. And we protested and they awarded it back to us. So the government saved $5 million. But the reason why I was primarily responsible, because in the proposal, they were putting in a very expensive, military grade computer system or something. I think it was a 68,000 line of processors and had expensive components and things like that. And I wasn't trying to save the government money. I was just trying to make sure I could do the job. And I was familiar with consumer grade computers like the IBM PC at the time, knew the architecture, or knew the assembly language. And I told them they can't put that expensive computer in there because I won't be able to figure out how to make it work in time. It was a 6-month contract. And the government said, no, we don't believe that PC clone can do that. And they told me to write up an explanation of why it could. And if the government accepted it, then they would go that route. And they did. I wrote up this thing. I said, I'm going to replace quadratic equations with tables and linear interpolation. And I need a waiver for the real-time routines to put them in assembly language rather than a high-level language. And the government came back and said, okay, you're qualified, and we accept that approach. So if I hadn't done that, then our price would have been right up there at the 20 million mark with this other computer system. And I probably wouldn't known what the hell I was doing. But so they bought our cheap computer, and it worked. They bought subsequent follow-ups. I think Saudi Arabia and Taiwan both bought our trainer and so forth. So yeah, I brag that I saved the government $5 million because I think I really did.
Well, that was something you did for the rest of your career, I believe, wasn't it?
Say it again.
Sorry, that was something you did for the rest of your career, working for the military, I believe.
Oh, yeah. Well, there was some karma in there, and that I didn't get a pat on the back or anything, a bonus or anything for what I did for the simulator company, but they had hired a guy to this company to come in and build a custom board because we needed to take 2 Tecmar graphics masters and overlay them on top of video from a Laserdisc player. We needed to be able to use a register to move the video around and so forth. So this guy went on to start his own company out in California, and he called me up one day and said, hey, I'll pay you over double what you make there if you open up an office in the Central Florida there and hire programmers, because they're way cheaper than California. And that's what I did. So I ended up working out for me, and I went on to get into video compression and streaming and things like that. Went on to develop video for Windows drivers for an MPEG encoder chip that Digital Equipment Corporation was building as a contract. I actually went back to the simulator company and as a contractor and wrote a shoot, don't shoot. It was basically a trainer where military police would be presented with these big projection screens, and they had a laser in their gun, and they had to talk down like a criminal, like robbing a bank. And if they didn't say the right things, the instructor would escalate it. So it would go to maybe the guy pulling his gun. And if he said the right things, it would go to de-escalation, where the guy like gives up and things like that. So that was a trainer that I worked on for about 1.5 years after I had left them much, several years later. And that was a fun experience. And the coolest thing about that was really a graphics editor that I did, that you had to know where the person was in the video, and you had to create what's called a hit plate that described the person. So if you shot and you hit it, whether it was lethal, non-lethal, and that. And I made a video editor that allowed you to put geometric shapes on the video and attach them specific points and move things around, and then interpolate between the frames, because you can't do it for every single frame. And that was probably the most impressive part of the project for me personally, that I did. And so that was a cool thing. And then I went on to, there's a company called Fire Talk that basically made something like the Zoom, except it was just audio at the time, no video. And that I worked for them, and I made a server that interfaced the computer network to the telephone system. So you could call in and join a computer network, conference. And it had a voice menu, so it would prompt you to put in things, like numbers, codes, and things, and join, answer questions and stuff like that. So I did that. And then after that, I went on to get involved with the company for 18 years, designing encoder products, video encoding and transmission over networks, mainly for traffic monitoring. We have them installed at, various DOTs and so forth. And so I did that for a long time, and then kind of retired from that. And a buddy of mine that had worked for me here in Florida went out to California and became a big success working for Sony PlayStation. And he got me hooked up with a company doing some IoT development. And basically, it was an embedded processor on a nightlight that had all these sensors, and they were trying to use it to monitor old people in their homes, so that the family would have an app on their phone to see that, that this person like maybe went to the kitchen, and, there's some activity that, that, grandma's still moving around, that sort of thing.
Right.
So I did that for a year and a half, but eventually they had big ideas that they couldn't carry through with. They wanted to do fall down detection and some very complicated things. And eventually they ran out of funding. And after that, I sort of semi-permanently retired.
Right. Okay. Are you enjoying your retirement?
I love it. I've always been very active in water sports, wakeboarding. I foil board. And so that is a huge thing for me. I've been living on a lake for a number of years, and we have what they call a cable park down here, where you can get pulled by a cable around the lake, and they have all kinds of ramps and rails and things that you can go on. So that's always been a big part of my life. And I have no problem not working. I love playing. It's like I'm in my second childhood, where I'm like a teenager. You don't want to do anything but play.
Well, thanks for a really fascinating talk. It's been really interesting. Thank you for this.
Yes, well, I appreciate you giving me a chance to tell my story. It's kind of fun,